Hi, I'm Max Brantley with the Arkansas Times. It's Monday, September 15th. Today was the deadline for defendants in the same-sex marriage suit to file briefs on why the law should be kept in place. The state, represented by Attorney General Dustin McDaniel's office, said the tradition of marriage between man and woman was a tradition and shouldn't be overturned by a court. The most notable thing that happened today was a great brief from Larry Crane, the Pulaski County clerk, in which, though he's a defendant, said he thinks the ban should be overturned. It was a ringing declaration for same-sex rights equal rights for same-sex partners, and I urge you to take a look at it. It's a great brief. On the same subject, there's a campaign underway in Fayetteville to gather signatures to call for a public vote on Fayetteville's civil rights ordinance that extends protections in employment and other forms of, and housing and other forms of a life for gay people. It's mostly being led by churches. They haven't yet reported how much money they've raised for the campaign or formed organization papers with the Ethics Commission, but they will soon, I think. We've got some news today from polls, and it's kind of one of those days when you can find a polling result that suits your mood depending on which party you're in. Two different polls released today, one by a Republican-leaning group, one by a Democrat-leaning group, and guess what? The polls pretty well went in line with the thinking of the people who sponsored them. The Republican polls showed Republicans ahead. The Democratic polls showed Democrats generally ahead, although a dead heat in the race for governor. I think that probably Bill Clinton had it right when he was with his wife Hillary Clinton in Iowa this weekend at the Tom Harkin Steak Fry. And he says, you know, the top races are probably pretty close. He thinks there's a chance for Mark Pryor to win the Senate race still. But he joined others in criticizing the heavy amount of money that's being spent by the Koch billionaires to try and win the race for Tom Cotton. In other political news, French Hill, the 2nd District Republican candidate, went on TV with Roby Brock of Talk Business and finally made it completely clear where he stands on the minimum wage proposal that's going to be on the ballot in November in Arkansas. He said he hasn't decided yet. He's been quoted as being for it, quoted as being against it. Now he hadn't decided. He hadn't told us when he's going to decide or if he will decide in time to let voters know just how he feels. Pat Hayes, his Democratic opponent, favors an increase in the minimum wage. As I pointed out today, a current minimum wage worker in Arkansas makes about $13,000 a year. If he or she doesn't take a vacation, that's about a quarter of what it takes to join the country club of Little Rock, where French Hill drives his old car to play golf when he has time. One more interesting piece of political news: Republican Party discipline is usually unshakable, that you've got to be, you're either with them, you're against them, and you're not among them if you're against them. Davy Carter, the House Speaker, has sometimes broken with that pattern. It served him well in the last legislature when he led the passage of the private option expansion of Medicaid as part of the Affordable Care Act. Over the weekend, he sent out a short message in which he expressed support for a Democratic candidate for state Senate, James McClain, who's running against a Republican Tea Party type candidate who's an absolute opponent of the private option plan, Linda Collins Smith. That was unusual. It raised some hackles among Republicans. He also had something nice to say in the race for state treasurer, where Karen Garcia, the Democrat, is running against Dennis Milligan, who also ran for state treasurer, oddly enough, against the private option, and also did some terrible things in terms of Duncan Baird, who was a legislative ally of Davy Carter. So though he didn't directly endorse Karen Garcia, the Democratic treasurer candidate, he did say some nice things about her, and that's just about as bad in the Republican world. I'm really looking for some other Republicans who led that private option effort to say something publicly about the Milligan Garcia race. Mike Huckabee, the former governor, was in the news today. He met with Washington reporters. He continues to tantalize people, the idea that he might run for president. Of course, that's good for his business. It helps keep his name in the limelight, helps him make money. He says he's been to Israel 17 times, and so that makes him an expert on Middle East affairs. And the suggestion is that in these troubling times in the Middle East, a guy like Mike Huckabee is your man. I don't know that our intimate biblical knowledge of the Holy Land is necessarily a recommendation to fight ISIS, but that's his suggestion. Finally, there's a story that's not in Arkansas, but I think it has Arkansas connections. Adrian Peterson, the NFL star for the Minnesota Vikings, is going to be allowed to continue to play football for the team, even though he faces a criminal charge in Texas for injuring his own child with excessive corporal punishment. This is an issue here because Arkansas is among the nation's leaders in continuing to use corporal punishment in school. I've referred readers to a website operated by Little Rock social worker Randy Cox, an old childhood friend of mine as it happens, who has a very simple motto for his website: never hit a child. Do we really teach children or anybody anything by responding to misbehavior with violence? I don't think so, and I think we've got a lot to learn here. I'm Max Brantley. I'll be back tomorrow.